While the minds of many in the LGBTQI+ community are very much aware that in about 9 months we will celebrate Stonewall 50, very few realize that 2 pre-Stonewall organizations will reach their half-century mark in the months before June. I find it quite compelling that both MCC and Dignity predate what is often thought of as the birth of the queer liberation movement, and that both of our organizations have overcome unimaginable obstacles in surviving to this point. There certainly was a gay and genderqueer movement culture prior to Stonewall, with courageous local organizing based on civil rights protests that stood up to police brutality in several cities around the US. Groups like Daughters of Bilitis and the Mattachine Society, and of course the Bars. But the only pre-Stonewall organizations that continue to shape our lives and culture at the national and even international levels are MCC and Dignity USA. We are, in many ways, the twins of the first wave of the current queer liberation movement. I don't think it's a stretch to say that MCC and Dignity provided the rationale, community base, and leadership that propelled the development of the current LGBTQI+ movement. Throughout my decades of work with Dignity, I have heard over and over and over again how the faith groups were the earliest sanctuaries for gay and lesbian people in their communities, other than the bars. From the fellowship we offered sprang the community newspapers, the political organizations, the sports teams, the legal aid groups, the suicide prevention and addiction recovery services, the pride marches and festivals, the choruses, the great diversity of groups that allow us to gather with tribe members who share our interests, talents, and commitment to a freer future. The values that infuse the culture of faith, honesty, respect, community, sacrifice, justice, all of these are bedrock to a movement that started with people having the courage to be true to whom they knew themselves to be. The belief that there had to be divine love and purpose infused with our identities gave our pioneering faith leaders the courage to be themselves and to support others in the journey to self-knowledge, self-love, and self-disclosure. The slow shift that we've experienced from a culture of life in the closet or in the shadows to living in the light of day has been a major factor in the growth of support for LGBTQI equality throughout society. We all know that once people know that someone they love is transgender or queer, their likelihood of supporting equality increases immensely. It's about conversion of heart and souls, not just changing minds. Our work has also helped to transform religious communities across our country and in many places around the world. Early on in our histories, the idea that one could be gay or genderqueer and deeply faith-filled was incomprehensible to the vast majority of people. Despite the centrality of love in our traditions, most LGBTQI people experienced condemnation, exclusion, and invisibility in our places of worship. Again, through the persistence of presence, the re-examination of spiritual texts and traditions through queer lenses, proud public witness, and bold proclamations of our truth in communities that walked beside traditional churches, We now see a profusion of congregations and denominations striving towards the affirmation of all the people of God. Polls show that the percentage of people of faith who see being gay or transgender as a moral failing or as sinful has dramatically decreased. And the number of the faithful who support inclusion, marriage equality, transgender protections, and a wide variety of civil equality measures is growing to ever-increasing records. While there is clearly still work to be done, our witness in the past 4 to 5 decades has bent the arc of religious history towards justice. The leadership of faith organizations like MCC and Dignity in the effort to create a more just and inclusive society is clear, at least to us. However, it often feels as if we are marginalized by the very communities we serve. The pain inflicted on LGBTQI people by too many who claim to speak for God often leads people of faith and faith groups to be sidelined or despised by the general LGBTQI community. Many of us have felt the sting of criticism, dismissal, or outright attacks from within our own faith traditions. The task of those who challenge the status quo is always difficult. In this way, we experience the pain of being the last. Like Jesus, who warns those accompanying him that the way forward includes persecution to the point of death, we should not be surprised that our message would lead to scorn, derision, threats, and the questioning of our credibility or motives. We of MCC and Dignity have certainly experienced rejection and vilification by many in our home traditions, particularly in our early days, but even until today. What we live and preach challenge beliefs that have been considered by many to be core elements of faith. Our leaders and our right to exist were decried by mainstream churches for many, many years. We were excluded from religious gatherings. We were told the rituals we conducted were invalid. We had our gathering spaces vandalized and burned. The theology advanced by those like John McNeil of blessed memory, Troy Perry, Nancy Wilson, Mary Hunt, and so many others was denounced as heretical. We were blamed for HIV, AIDS, even as we taught so many others how to provide pastoral and practical care to the suffering and to their loved ones and families. We have been denounced as threats to civilization, the family, and to true faith by religious leaders, and viciously targeted by those on the radical right wing of our faiths. We have been physically attacked, terminated from jobs or volunteer ministries within our institutions, and expelled from our communities. Those at the highest levels of our church structures have done everything in their power to force us out of existence, and yet we rise. In the face of all this oppression, the survival and endurance of MCC and Dignity is a true testament to our rootedness in truth. It is difficult not to feel pain and anger about the lack of recognition or affirmation, by the cruelty we have endured from others in the faith community, to be sure. But as we see in the gospel, this is the path we are promised. Our challenge is to persist in this path, remaining true to the call of our faith through discouragement, shame, rage, temptations towards other uses of our time and energies, or whatever other disincentives we may experience. For your tenacity in persisting on this path, I salute each one of you here tonight and members of the community who are not able to be with us. We now turn to living as the servant of all. Clearly, as MCC and Dignity have provided tremendous service to the LGBTQI community and to the faith communities for decades. Now, broadening and stretching our scope is how we are called into the future. Living as the servant of all means finding the capacity within ourselves to recognize and struggle against the oppressions that limit and denigrate too many other lives. Living as the servant of all is countercultural. It is a rejection of all that is valued in our society and even in many religious communities. Recognition, social affirmation, wealth, status, prioritization of the physical, primacy of self. It is the daily turning to that still, small voice of truth within each one of us that is the call of the Spirit, and to trusting that truth so deeply that it compels our actions. It certainly means continuing to pursue justice for ourselves, but also recognizing that others on the margins deserve our efforts to secure justice and a fair share of the Earth's resources. It brings us back to the passage with which I began this reflection, where we are told by Christ that in welcoming the small, the weak, the innocent, the vulnerable, we welcome the divine. This is a call that is being lived more and more in our LGBTQI faith communities. Solidarity with others in their struggles for justice, equality, and inclusion. Even as we continue to stand for ourselves, we are recognizing how our struggle is intertwined with those of others. Our liberation movement echoes those that came before us, all the way back to the cries for release from slavery in the Hebrew Bible. Our struggle is and will be followed by more waves of people striving to have their own rights and dignity recognized and affirmed. We have learned that justice movements are not only political and cultural, but rooted in the affirmation of the common humanity we all share through divine love. This is a deeply spiritual principle, and it is precisely the way in which our faith communities, rooted in overcoming the oppression that LGBTQI+ people have experienced for too many centuries, have strived for justice for past decades, that we celebrate with these anniversaries. We are indeed, paradoxically and miraculously, first, last, and servant of all. Remain true to the persistence of faith, hope, and love, my friends, for our world and our church continue to need your witness. Congratulations to you, MCC Boston, and MCC churches around the world as you reflect on these generations of commitment, celebrate all that you have achieved, and recommit to the ongoing work of building a just and inclusive world. On behalf of Dignity Boston and Dignity USA, I am proud and grateful to partner with you in this work.